Welcome to the Smallbrain Records Music Podcast. This is episode 10. Today we have our guest, Christine Payne and Ashley. You're going to have to help me pronounce that.
Philippian.
All right. Cool. These are the guys that are working with OpenAI and Musenet. This is like a machine learning program that analyzes music. They will most likely be able to explain this much better than I will be able to. But you guys want to go ahead and maybe introduce what you've been working on to people who may not know?
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. So I've basically been using the same kind of neural net technology that people are using to do language models, to be able to generate paragraphs that sound like they're telling a whole story. I thought, well, we could use that same technology and turn it instead on music. So I worked on pulling apart music and being able to write it note for note and timing by timing in a way that would be compatible with these models. And then what's really exciting about it at that point is you no longer have to write rules. You know, the model doesn't need to know ahead of time the time signature or the key or anything about any of these chord progressions. It really just learns all of these things by, I then feed it many pieces, many MIDI files, and little by little the model learns patterns in these pieces. And then what's really cool is once it's really learning those patterns, you can turn it into a generator, and it creates new versions of those patterns. And those are the pieces that I've been creating more recently.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how did you, I guess, start getting into the whole machine learning thing? Because that's like, cutting edge right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It actually started because, so I'm also a pianist, and I've always someone who wants to hang out and turn pages for you, and so I thought, like, wouldn't it be cool to learn a tech like this that could maybe turn my own pages, and that's actually got me to learning about machine learning in the first place, the possibility of me thinking that could my head motions, something like that. And then the more I learned about machine learning, the more I thought, like, wow, this is just a super powerful technology. It's it's really exciting to find a field that's just getting going like this, and where things are going to be changing so quickly. And so the more I learned about it, the more I just realized it's an exciting field, and I wanted to be part of it. And I'm a big fan of math and physics, and all of that background tied into the sort of tools I need for this.
Yeah, that's awesome. So who are some of the like artists that, because I'm also a piano player. I've been playing for 15 years now.
Nice.
Who are some like composers and stuff that you were like the most?
So my background is mostly classical music. So you can probably hear in the model that people say, "Oh, the model's really good at Chopin," and that's probably because that's the one that that's my personal favorite. I really love Chopin, Brahms, Rachmaninoff, and then my other favorite is I play a lot of chamber music. So pieces that are cello and piano, or violin, cello, piano, that sort of thing. So that's my personal favorite, although it's been interesting now trying to learn more about jazz, learning more about different pop artists, all sorts of things. So.
Right. So have you heard of like artists like Aphex Twin and like experimental stuff like that?
A little bit, but it's not something I would know well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Have you, like, what's the end goal for the Musenet? Like, where do you hope to see it sit the most with music?
I'm very much in the point of exploring which future things will work and not work. I'm particularly excited about the human and AI combination. So ways that sort of finding out ways that either performers or composers will be able to use Musenet in creating their own pieces or getting inspired to write pieces. That I find really fascinating. There are a lot of possible directions I can imagine. So at this point, it's a little bit doing some initial research and seeing what I think will work well.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that I've been super curious about with the whole artificial machine learning and music is the whole aspect of, like, can it really be considered music and stuff? Or, like, when someone listens to a song, usually, like, it's something that a person's put their time and emotion
Especially
and stuff
Chopin.
into. Yeah, especially Chopin. And like, what I've been so curious about is like, what does that mean when a robot does it?
No, I know what you mean. It's making me think. It was maybe a couple months ago that I had the first like song generation that actually had a moment that to me felt emotional and sad, and I was just floored because up until that point I was like, well, it's cool, but they're just kind of, they're patterns and they're kind of familiar and that sort of thing. But to get to the point where the piece itself actually felt emotional, like to me that was a turning point in the project. So I completely hear that a lot of music and art in general, it has to do with like our own experiences. But I guess that's also where I'm excited about the human and AI combination, because right now I see, there are a lot of people who would write a gorgeous song if they knew how to do it and have that life experience that they would want to express, but they don't know how to sit down and write note for note or chord by chord. And maybe you'd be able to use a tool like this to kind of give you ideas. You get to pick your own favorite parts of it, and then turn that into a piece that's expressing real human emotion.
It kind of raises a few questions, Emmanuel speaking. Because you told us that you kind of felt kind of emotional listening to computer generated music, and I can understand that definitely. Although, like, you also talk about like people who would be able to create amazing music with great talent and a great ear and great taste. Uh, but it kind of raises the question to me, because music is probably in part result of our experience. Um, the experience of learning the music as a musician yourself, I'm sure you understand.
Yeah.
You have to have this kind of commitment to it. Is kind of a life commitment that you have, and that also kind of influence not only your music but also your drive to create better music. So
yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. And at this point, I don't see this AI music as replacing those musicians who have, really dedicated their life, and they know, I mean, I've played my whole life, and I know that when you hit like a great Chopin piece or a great, even a great modern piece, there's something different there. There's more, it's that combination of the really long structure, the journey that you go on as you're listening or playing the piece, and yes, that kind of thing I think is still very human at this point.
definitely. Tommy?
So something I've been really thinking about is like, will it, in your opinion, do you think it'll create new forms of music, or do you think the products that it makes will only be derivatives of the input, like the music tokens as you were talking about? Do you think it'll be able to ever come up with something new?
That's a great question. It's definitely something that I think about. Right now, I think the easiest way I try to push it towards things that are new are the blends between different styles. So if you go to the blog, there's a link to one piece where I started with some notes from a Chopin nocturne, but then I ask it to create a piece that's in like a style of Bon Jovi. And so to hear the model try to like figure out some way to blend those two, like, I think that is probably where right now you'll be able to hit things that are actually genuinely new and not just we're imitating a band that already exists feeling.
Right.
But more generally, I think it's really interesting to explore that idea of like what would it mean to create something totally brand new, but presumably something that humans still want to listen to and find interesting. And so finding ways to train the model on this is what people like to listen to, and having that be the reward even more than this is what already exists.
For sure. Do you think that, like, I mean, I don't have much knowledge of machine learning, but what do you think the the biggest capabilities that it would be able to have with analyzing music? How well do you think it would be able to take like electronic music and train it on something like that? Like, how much data does it need in order to learn a new style like that?
So right now the Musenet project is entirely using MIDI files.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, I have one big model that has just learned all these different files. So the really nice thing about that is that if you want to introduce something new, you're not starting with a model that knows nothing about music and is starting from scratch. You're really starting already from this huge understanding of music. And so it really does work to then just add in a small set of MIDI files, and it can learn those styles pretty well. I've even started working with a few composers who have started sending me their own MIDI files. And when they hear Musenet trying to imitate their style, they're like, wow, it's kind of amazing that it figures it out, and it really feels like it's them. So yeah, that's what's exciting about having one model that has just learned such a wide range of varieties, is that it does have that ability to learn something new fairly quickly.
Yeah, definitely. So the way you talk about it, it almost makes it feel like it's another person. Like you have someone here that you're like, here, listen to this song for a sec. Like, is that?
I should probably avoid doing that. I think it's only because I've been listening, I've been listening to samples and working on it for the past months, and so I've gotten too attached to it. But you're right. At the end of the day, these are very well trained matrices and numbers that we're throwing around.
But it would learn similar to that same way in a way, wouldn't it? Though the way after all the training and all.
Yeah. So I think what the model has learned is a sense of these are patterns of notes that happen across lots of different styles of music. So, we talk about, there's, a 1 chord or a 4 chord, things like that happen across many, many different genres. And things like that, those are the kind of patterns that it's learned really well. And that's where it's a real advantage to not start from scratch when you try to train it on a new genre. It doesn't have to relearn, oh, this is what a piano note is, or this is what a drum is. It already has that basic understanding.
Right. And like, how does it do with percussion? I've been keeping up on the like notes and sides of it, but like, how well do you think it would perform on something more experimental where the drums are like 7/8 time that are like just weird? How do you think it would handle something like that?
That's a really good question. So maybe a strength and a problem with the model right now is that it's literally predicting each drum hit, like one hit at a time. So it'll do a beat, and then it tells the model how long to wait before the next one, and then the next instrument. And so it's really just moment by moment, which for a lot of pop music is probably overkill, because usually you just have like one drum pattern and you're good to go, and you don't need something that powerful doing each moment in the drums. But when you're talking about something experimental and where it's, a much more interesting percussion part, then that's actually where this could be really powerful, because there's no reason for it not to be able to do something really pretty involved.
For sure. And I just thought I'd mention, there is an entire database that's been in the works for Aphex Twin and Boards of Canada and experimental electronic music that I could send you a link to.
Oh, cool. Please do. I'm always looking for more data. So yes.
Sweet. So another one I had, I think, would ambient music be a really nice genre for it to analyze? I think that something so minimal would either be really tough for it to replicate or be like so easy.
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't tried that directly. I feel like that kind of music often depends on the sound quality more than the individual notes. So that's where I would hesitate that possibly a MIDI approach, until you get better at the MIDI to then going back to the raw audio.
For sure.
I can imagine that being hard. I'm hesitating also because I can't remember the name, but there's someone on Twitter who has an amazing ambient music project right now. Oh, I wish I could track it down. I'll have to send you the link afterwards. But yes, I think there also are some really cool approaches that I know are going on. But possibly, especially if I get to the point where the MIDI to raw audio is sounding more convincing.
Yeah, and how is the progress on like not just using MIDI, but like so example for like synthesizers, for synthesizer voices? How well would it be? How, like, what's the progress on stuff like that instead of just composing?
hmm So that right now is open for me. I imagine there are other people who have been working on that sort of thing more, and
Mhm.
I've been entirely focused on the MIDI side of it up until now. So at this point, I'm eager to learn what already exists, and to find out if that's a good next approach, or so for me right now, it's pretty wide open.
Yeah, for sure. Um,
But I'm also excited to work with actual musicians and hear them performing these pieces. I'm super excited to do that.
that'll be sweet. And have, with the new MIDI system version 2 coming out um, in the next, I don't know how in the progress on that is, but it's going to have so much control data in there. Do you think that'll speed up the process for learning? Because it has, instead of like 0 to 120, it's got like something in like the billions of program CC changes and stuff.
Okay. Yeah. So currently I am I'm not including a lot of those control things. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe in the future I will, because I know that is really important for a lot of the different kinds of sounds. Um, I was focused on things that I thought would become good tokens that the model could really learn and do well with. And the
Mm-hmm.
problem when you get to just having, quite such a variety of possible different effects is that it's hard for models to learn things that they only see once in a while.
Right, right.
But if there are things that are happening commonly, like I do include like pedaling for piano or that sort of thing.
Oh,
So if
okay.
there are things like that which are really pretty key and important to include, then and if other people have suggestions of things that I should really be including, I'd be happy to learn about that.
Mm-hmm. All right, Emmanuel, I think you had a question.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating actually, because as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong. Basically, the software learns through MIDI files, and it's mostly around the notes. Or do you also take into account? You told about pedaling, but things like velocity or rubato, things like that, like on.
Yes, yeah, that's a
Like,
good question. So I do include the velocity or the volume of the notes.
mhm.
Although right now I'm only including that for the piano notes.
Yeah.
The Again, that same worry about not wanting to have too many different tokens and having the model just not learn at all some of these different instruments. I have some ideas of how I want to go back and make that more flexible so that even the other instruments will be able to include volume, because I think that is a really important part of what makes something sound musical.
Yeah, because that
Um,
seems
and
like a
then,
big gap between the
sorry,
notes and the texture, you know,
uh,
like
it's a bit.
the sounds and the tones, like
Mhm,
the way it's interpreted, the music is interpreted. But it seems to me like, for how little I've seen of your project, that it's already very impressive when it comes to the musicality. And as you said, you could easily, it didn't happen to me, but I can easily understand, you know, getting to work on something and putting some randomly, not randomly, but generating music, and being transported. So that's
mhm.
very important. That's a big deal when it comes to
Yes,
AI and music, and it's
yeah,
very
to me,
impressive.
I totally agree that I think to get to that moment where we're actually, emotionally affected by, and find something convincing, that's a big deal. I agree. It's right on the border, and it really just is like once in a long while I hear one, and I'm like, wow, this really works. But yeah, in the live Twitch concert that we had, there was
Mhm.
one moment where someone was like, wow, that was actually really emotional. It made me tear up for a moment, and I was like,
You
even if
did
it
put
happens once in a while, it's still exciting because that's something we can work towards.
well, you did put Wagner and Chopin in there.
I
I didn't put
think I
Wagner.
just did a mix of everything. So yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
But
so
yeah, there certainly are certain genres that I think are, and especially because the piano right now has a lot more room to do volume and to be more flexible. So I think probably at this point the more emotional things tend to be the piano solo ones.
yeah, and especially like when you think, we had this conversation on the podcast, on one of the last previous episodes, about music texture and interpretation, and we talked about the piano, the way you don't have many different tools to be expressive on the piano, but you have more than enough to go from Chopin to Rachmaninoff to Liszt, and so on, and you could. I guess it's probably simpler to work on an instrument like a piano, to kind of zero in on parameters like velocity, like even tempo. I think for
Hmm.
piano solo. So
Yeah,
where are you around, in these areas?
yeah. Well, so I've been really excited to hear that as it's generating piano music, it's actually getting things that that human pianists would do. Like I hear it voicing the chords in a way where you get the outer voices more and the inner voices
Yeah.
less. Or it'll often do rubato in exactly the kind of places that I would do it, and I find that really exciting to hear. I mean, obviously, it often does crazy things and stuff that humans wouldn't quite do, but to get this sense that it really is learning because it's learning these patterns. It learns that that as people are performing these pieces, there are certain moments that they really bring out more, and I find that really exciting to get the sense that it's starting to pick that up.
It's funny because you say it picks up rubato exactly at the same places that you would. It begs the question: how close do you think the AI is to actually the person who programs it?
That's a good question. I am sure that it is influenced by the things that I paid attention to the most.
Mhm.
So, the composers that I cared about, or, the fact that it's better at piano than at other things. I imagine that if it had been a jazz musician doing this, the model would be much, much better at jazz. So I think that's a fair point that all of these systems reflect the people working on it. Yeah, I mean, I
It's
think
funny.
ideally I'll, and that's actually part of where I'm excited now to open it up and get feedback from lots of different people,
Mhm.
because it makes me more aware of the points that maybe I wasn't noticing well enough.
Hmm. So, do you think that this kind of technology could be used backwards and kind of analyze music and put it on a chart? Like, say, it's similar to this one. But like, so if you had like a spectrum with like Bon
Like a
Jovi,
DNA.
Debussy, Chopin, and stuff, and you gave it a MIDI piece, do you think it could plot a dot like it's related? It's dissimilar to all these different artists.
I think that's a great idea. I think that's definitely doable. You could imagine using something like this to then say, oh, this is probably a piece by whoever it is, or this piece is partway between these two. Yeah, I think that's absolutely possible.
Yeah, it's crazy. Uh,
Like you
On the
do.
blog post itself, there's a little graph we did it at the bottom,
mhm,
which shows how the model, what it learned about these different composers. So you
right.
see that like it actually thinks that some of the French pianists or French composers are more close together, and then some of the bands are close together, and then people are pointing out there's this funny moment where Wagner is closer to Queen than to
I can get Queen, but Britney Spears. Like
sorry.
I can get Wagner and Queen a little bit, but Britney Spears. Come
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that like I could almost believe some sort of Wagner Queen connection, but yeah,
yeah,
I suspect it has more to do with the kinds of instruments that are in the MIDI files,
yeah,
or so there's probably something specific that it was learning that's close.
yeah.
But
Maybe there's something that the AI understands and that we don't. Maybe there is a.
musicologists like 100 years from now will be like, ah, it knew.
Oh yeah. So, as a musician, like yourself, where do you think the coolest thing to see this would be in the future? Like, to maybe make it write you music to learn on piano or something like that. Maybe like generate it so it could make the best like practice routines for learning piano or something.
That's a great idea. I hadn't thought of that, but that actually makes sense that you might be able to fine tune it on. There are all these piano method books that already exist, and there might be some way to train it to be able to say, oh, I really love this piece, but it's way too difficult for where I am right now, and the model could rewrite it for an easier kind of version, or something. That's a great. I haven't thought along those lines, but that could actually be really fun to kind of, or here's an orchestra piece and turn it into like a small group or a band or something like that. That could be really fun to explore.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
mean, I think it's wide open, and this is part of where it's fun to bring musicians and artists into the machine learning world, because kind of you bring ideas like this that people might not think of if they're not in the music world also.
Right.
Yeah, you
Go ahead.
go ahead.
All right, thanks. I was wondering, can you set up parameters like, for example, you would want to ask your AI to create along those lines something like Chopin etude, you know, like you set up.
Mhm.
Oh, I just want to make a track with only black keys or
Ah,
only thirds, you know, or only certain techniques. Can you set up parameters like that?
uh, I can imagine ways to do that, particularly with the black keys. That it would be fairly reasonable to imagine some way to tell it, I really want to focus on these particular MIDI pitches, and probably even for thirds. Um, it's not set up to do that at this point, but that seems like it could be doable.
Yeah.
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 So about that, like, how do you go about like setting parameters and stuff? Just like a little more into the technical side of setting up these machines.
Sure. I mean, so right now, we have a web interface that's open for anyone to try, and the kind of parameters you can change with that are really, you can ask it to be in a specific genre. So you can be looking at Chopin, or I think Lady Gaga is up there, and Tchaikovsky, and a few other a range of people, and then you can also choose if you wanted to start from nothing or if you want to start from an already known piece.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can create pieces from that. You can also choose which instruments you're asking it to be in. It doesn't 100% follow the instruments, but it's a strong suggestion.
Right, right.
So those are the ones that are kind of externally available.
Right.
As you're building these models, it's really, that's part of the fun of programming is, it's really whatever you can imagine. So yeah, it would be possible to think like, oh, I wanted to, as I'm sampling the output, maybe I want to tell it, no, if you're generating only the white notes or something like that, I don't want that piece. Or so, there are ways that you could imagine trying to reward certain kinds of pieces. Is that
right? Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So how would it do analyzing like a record label? So if instead of giving it a person, if you gave it like Warp Records or our record label or something, and it analyzed the mass of it, could it work with that so it could generate a song that would most likely come out from that label?
So again, I've only been doing MIDI files, so I'll within that, I would say yes. It's not really currently set up that way, but it would be pretty easy to imagine.
Right.
So basically what the model does is for each of these individual composers, it then has learned a set of numbers that to it represent that composer. So,
right.
Chopin might be 0.2, 0.7, -1, it just like literally has a series of numbers, and that is what Chopin means to the model.
That's so
and
weird.
So you can imagine doing something like, oh, I want something that's halfway between these two composers, and maybe what you might just do is average those numbers, like literally just try it out that way. And so I could imagine maybe, if you wanted sort of an ensemble of all these people were on this label, then just try everything with numbers.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Average between Britney Spears and Wagner, you get Queen, right?
You can try it out. I haven't done that one, but that would be hilarious.
It would.
So, yeah. Can you go in there and adjust those numbers to make an output using just the numbers that it makes?
Yeah, I mean, so at the end of the day, these really just are, lines of code that you can go in and shift and you can make it work to do whatever you want to be doing. So yes, I could go in and say, rather than just take this number as is, like try blending a few of them together or something like that. So yeah.
So I guess, what would you say? Like the most exciting thing that you're like really interested for with this all to go, like with the whole machine learning thing, like what's some exciting things you hope to do with it and all that?
So with music, yes. So I mean, I think like I'm certainly really excited about now with some human collaborations. I'm excited to kind of get more MIDI files from ongoing composers, training the model on their work, and then, to kind of co-compose a piece that way to have a way to inspire composers. Um, excited about, some people are talking about adding lyrics to these songs, and I think that would be a really fun way to do it.
Oh, for sure.
I think there are lots of possible really fun directions. I love the idea of, if you could show the model a picture and then it had to generate a piece that was sort of the mood of the picture. I feel like there are just lots of crazy possible things you could do.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
yeah, really at this point, I'm taking a step back and exploring, what is the exciting next step.
Hmm. So, what do you listen to musically these days? And like, do you think after working on this, has that changed your view on listening to classical music and compositions in general?
Oh, interesting. I'm laughing because during the daytime, I'm usually listening to Musenet creations and trying
Oh,
to
really?
debug it. Although not always. No, often I do have on the background different radio stations. But yeah, I've got two little kids right now, so
Oh,
my
nice.
musical kids are Crazy Frog and the
Oh,
Frog
yes.
song and all that. I'm not really high music at this point. But no, I do I still love, going back to every once in a while when I go back to really listening to, I heard a Brahms concerto by the San Francisco Symphony the other day, and I'm like, oh yeah, there still is a long way to go.
For
It's
sure.
just amazing.
Maybe you should do a record label with all the best composition of music. But
Yeah.
I was wondering
I
because
have been excited that people are posting to Twitter their
yeah,
creations that they're making with Musenet, and some of them have been really, really pretty amazing. And so, yeah, I think it would be exciting to gather the best of album.
and yeah, especially if you can put it into MIDI, back into MIDI, so that you can use your own instruments
Hmm.
to make the interpretation. But
Hmm.
so you started off as a piano player, right?
Hmm. Yes.
And then how do you go from being a piano player to programming AI? Because it seems like not quite exactly the same thing.
No, no, it has been a shift. So personally, I just took a lot of online courses. So I was kind of floored to realize how much is available, even just a lot of free courses that are available. So I
On
did
programming?
sorry?
On programming? I'm sorry,
Programming
my French.
courses, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, I literally started out with a Python course that was online, and then I did the Fast AI sequence. There's Coursera has a sequence that's called Deep Learning by Andrew
Okay.
Ng, and that one I like a lot as well. And then once I started feeling, more fluent in that, then it was a matter of just jumping into projects, and as you work on something, you realize what you don't know and what you need to
Mhm.
learn. And the nice thing is, like, literally a lot of programming is just you do a Google search for how to do something, and it turns out that someone else has tried to figure it out too, and you can run with that.
Huh. So, but how do you go like from playing the piano and just you just got online and started to learn and say, oh, I could maybe do that AI thing to make.
Yeah, I mean, it really was little by little. I think I actually first got interested in I first got interested in building a game, and so I
Ah,
kind of tinkered with Unity a little while, and that turned out to be, actually pretty usable. And I've since taught my kids how to build their own little video games, and it's one of those things where you start with something that's mostly set and mostly ready to go,
hmm.
and then you realize, like, oh, I actually want to be able to make a little change, and so that motivates you to learn enough to figure out how to make that little change. And then the more involved you get, the more you're learning how to make changes on all of these pieces. And so now, I kept pushing in that direction until I'm at this point now of trying to write things from scratch, and big projects at this point.
That's very impressive. It's
Thank you.
whoa. Because I can get even in musicians they start with little games on their phones and apps
Mhm.
to make a little bit of music, and
Yeah.
next thing you know they have a huge studio and lots of
Yeah.
music instruments. And but it's difficult for me to really relate when it comes to math and science, because I'm so like it's so alien to me. And this is
Yeah.
most people probably, and this is why it's so impressive. And
Oh, thank
uh,
you. Yeah, I
just
mean, I
wow,
think the more
so
I dive into coding, the more you realize like there's no magic to it. It really is, little by little, you learn these
yeah,
different steps, you learn these tricks. But it's not like there's, something fundamentally impossible that only a small subset of people can do. It really is, just little by little figuring things out. And the more you realize, like, yeah, everybody, you pose a new problem to someone who's been programming for ages, and
mhm.
they might not even know how to do it. And everyone has that moment of like, you have to figure out how to break it into a problem that, there are little steps that you do know how to do, or you can figure out how to do.
And does it have some overlap with, like, for example, I do music, but I do other things, and I realize that what I've learned doing music I can also apply to other kind of activities like business, for example. And
Mhm.
is there some overlap between I guess there is between music making and programming. I cannot say that word to save my name.
Yeah,
Programming. I say
I
that from programming. Yeah.
yeah, nice.
And music making, I guess that there is. And can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of it is that like both music and programming, you kind of are constantly going back and forth between the level that you're looking at things. So I feel like in music, you get down to this fine detail of like every little note and exactly what you're doing with each note. And then you have to kind of zoom back to the bigger picture of, how is the overall piece going? How is the overall concert going? Um, and and you sort of have to be aware of all these different levels at once. Like as you're playing, you're also listening to what you're doing. You're listening to what other people are doing. And I think to a certain extent, programming has that same thing where, you're kind of keeping in mind this big project you're trying to do. But then it's all about the little details of any one part of it. And so it's that same feeling of being able to manage, um, and shift between levels of right now I'm focused on this little detail, but then I'm going to take a step back and get this big picture of what's going on.
It's fascinating. Like it seems to me like this is everything about life seems to be that way. You know what I mean?
That's probably
Like
fair. Yeah.
you can probably get through anything, just get by quite easily. But if you want to do anything well, it seems like you have this multi-level perspective that you need to acquire and
Mm-hmm.
you need to integrate. And it's amazing because when you think about creating AI, it's probably, I don't know how I see it. I don't understand anything about AI and programming. Oh, I did say it, but it seems to me like the ultimate goal would be to uh, create some kind of intelligence that would be able to have all these different level of analysis. As we talked before, the texture and the velocity and rubato and the you know it
Mm-hmm.
seems like the ultimate challenge when it
Yeah,
comes
no, I
to
think
creating.
you're exactly right that having that ability to do to pay attention at all these different levels it's a real skill. And it makes sense. It's probably something that we would want an AI to be able to do as well, especially if they're then relating to how humans will be in the same way. Yeah,
I think
it
so.
reminds me of I think going through piano lessons as a kid and learning that skill of, you know, concentrating what I'm doing mechanically, but also constantly having that outside awareness where I'm listening and I'm paying attention to what's going on in the big picture. And it was neat to learn that in the context of piano, but then realize, yeah, no, it actually totally applies to life. It applies to a lot of other things. And so,
It's a real testament, I think, to what human beings are. And because in a sense, well, maybe not, not
mhm,
everyone, I guess, but as a whole, we seem to be able to have this kind of multi-level analysis and way of seeing things. And but to a degree that right now it seems that at least some of us, like people like you, are even able to seriously consider recreating this amazing ability that we have, and make it, I don't know how to put it. It's nothing short of, it's, I don't know, magical. I don't find it. Because
I don't know if I would say magical so much as I've always been fascinated trying to figure out, how does my own brain work? How am I thinking about the world? How are other people thinking about the world? And I think when you just get deeply curious about questions like that, and so in some ways being able to program things that even approach having, when you try to think of like, well, how do humans learn something? How do they remember something? How all these sort of big open questions. It's kind of fun to imagine, like, well, how would you even create something that would try to do those kind of things?
If we ever succeed, it would mean that if we succeed to create exactly the same thing, that means that we may not be needed anymore, in the sense that they can then create themselves more themselves, like in the movies and stuff like that. But,
well, thankfully, that is where OpenAI is working really hard to align, think about human values, think about how we want anything like this to be supporting humanity and really going in that direction.
yeah.
So something I was wondering is, like, how strong of a machine do you need to run these off? So, like, if you wanted to have the Musenet work as some kind of VST or plugin in a audio workstation that would generate little MIDI lines, would that require a huge beefy computer?
That's a good question. So right now it is running on what's called a GPU, which is just a faster. It's a lot of people's graphics cards kind of thing, right. But it is a pretty hefty machine. I think there will be ways to, especially when you're just looking at the music generation side of it, probably ways to make it work on a smaller system. At this point for training, it really does need to have just this really beefy setup.
So it runs off a GPU, not a CPU?
Yes, yeah. Right now it has to be on a GPU.
Okay, like what type are you using?
So we've been using NVIDIA V100s for this.
Oh, okay.
But we're yes. It would be an interesting question to try to figure out how to make something like this work, but in smaller systems.
So, how many like MIDI files are you guys analyzing currently? Like thousands? Or...
yeah. So the data set that I have is hundreds of thousands at this point. Oh. So it's pretty huge.
So how do you go about like organizing that, or are they all pre-organized? Because I took a very, very small course like a year back using like a type of machine learning, but it looked to me like the hardest part was formatting the data was one of them.
Yeah, no, it's true. A lot of it was so basically a lot of the MIDI files came from so BitMIDI donated their collection to this project, and also Classical Archives did that. So I'm very grateful to those groups for doing that. And then I was also able to find some other collections that were just shared online. So I've included those. And then also now a few composers who have sent files. So it's true, it was a project kind of keeping that organized. At first I was using one library that was available to process the MIDI files and turn them into things that were easier to use. But then when I got to the point of hundreds of thousands of files, I was like, oh, this is going to be way too slow. I'm going to have to, figure out faster ways to do this. So yeah, it's certainly been a project figuring that out and figuring out how to go from these huge MIDI files, or not huge MIDI files, but huge collection of files to a usable set of numbers, tokens that can go into the model.
So are you working on this? Like, how many people are working with you with Musenet?
So I was involved mostly in taking the transformer architecture, which is this neural net that is processing the files, or that's processing the tokens. My work was in taking that and shifting it to work on music. So two other people at OpenAI, Riwan and Scott, were working on building the transformer code itself. And then others have worked on the web interface. So yeah, so we've had a few people working on the web interface, working on making sure the server is going to be up and happy. So there certainly have been other people who have helped a ton, especially on these aspects that I don't know as well. So
Right.
my main focus was on really doing the research of how to turn the MIDI and make it work, how I needed to change the transformer to make it do really well on music, and that side of thing was my main focus.
Mm-hmm. So, as we're nearing about an hour here, what would you say, like after doing all these crazy experiences with machine learning and music, how would you define music?
A nice, easy question to wrap up on. It's a good question. You know, the project has made me think a lot about, especially about what is it of music that makes us react to it and makes us love it.
Right.
You know, trying to break that apart and turn it into specific patterns. So, you know, sometimes, especially with certain piano progressions, like I can recognize, like there really is, you know, there's a certain chord progression that like I know is going to feel sad, and you know, I guess in some ways that is, it's just a pattern. It's a, you know, and that's something that a machine can learn. And then there are, you know, maybe certain instruments or certain timing, things like that that really just resonate. Yeah, but just trying to figure out if that's, you know, to what extent those are patterns that anyone can learn, and what extent those are like, you know, to invent something new like that is really, you know, you need to have had that lived human experience to go there. Certainly when you think of writing lyrics, those tend to be so intensely personal. I mean, really just, I'm finding it fascinating that it really is this, you know, music is this, we have learned and we've learned how to use it to express these emotions, and just trying to figure out to what extent a computer can do that too is cool.
Can I ask you something more or less related to that? I know Tommy is a piano player. I'm a piano player myself. You are a piano player. You're most likely familiar with Debussy Clair de Lune, right?
Yes.
And the other day with Tommy, we had this conversation because I'm actually learning it, and which were our favorite part of Clair de Lune. So, which is your favorite part of Clair de Lune? And why?
It's in most sheet music, it's at the bottom of the first page into the top of the second page. It's where there's like a low, I'm trying to picture in my mind, it's like a low D flat, and then the high octaves come in.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah, well, I just love that, because the kind of sound you can get, and going from this like inner, you know, you don't have too wide a range, and then all of a sudden just like it just opens up, and that vast sound that you can create at that moment, I love it. I love it. I never get tired of that piece, even though it's
so we're 2-1 because Tommy, I think it was the arpeggio right after that.
Okay.
My favorite part.
Too many yeah.
It's very subtle, but why would that be? Like why this part? Do you think? Why
that
this?
To me, it's that kind of sound, and the kind of openness that you can get from just that extreme range. It's kind of now I'm trying to picture it in my mind, but I love especially if you can like really go for the bottom of the bottom and the top, and get the voicing on the octaves just perfect. I feel like it's just one of those beautiful moments in sound, and that it's peaceful lead up into that too. Now I'm doubting if I've said the note names correctly. So for whoever's sorry if I totally gave the wrong pitches.
I think it's an E flat. Actually, I'm not sure.
E flat on top. Yeah. Sorry, I don't have it in front of me. I'm just trying to remember in my head quick.
Yeah, because then you have a B flat, which would be I think the fifth. I'm not sure. I don't have a piano right. But yeah, cool. It's because this is the kind of things, I guess, with Musenet that you kind of it's I don't know if it's ever possible to zero in on why exactly these kind of little short bits of music that they are so special, because It's not
Mhm.
just about the notes. It's not even about the interpretation. It's something about,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe it's the intent, maybe it's something that's not really like science cannot put the finger on it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, it's fair. Like why that one piece speaks, even people who know nothing about classical music, that's a
Yeah,
piece that everyone loves. And it
yeah,
connects in a way, and it's such a short piece, and but it's such a moment. And why that as opposed to all the other, little
yeah.
beautiful little pieces. I agree. I think that's completely fascinating why it is that resonates with so many people.
Because there are some kinds of some composers. You mentioned Chopin. I think he's a great one.
Mhm.
There is something to Chopin music, and I don't want to really get into the how I feel that way. But there definitely is something we can all agree on, that that's not just about the music. There's something, some underlying. I don't want to say a message,
Mhm.
but an intent, and I I don't even know how the words, but
Yeah.
it's
I suppose there is
how
that
do you
sense
want?
that, there was a person 200 years ago or something living this
Yeah.
and writing this. And I've always,
Mhm.
felt
So
that. I've tried to recreate pieces.
But
yeah,
do you have plans to, like, a map of where you want to go to kind of zero in on that kind of interpretation aspect, and
It's interesting. It's certainly a direction that I'm considering, is sort of maybe trying to get some human
yeah,
feedback on which, like, if we could really zero in on, this is a passage that many people think is sad, or this is happy and excited, trying to get a little bit more of a handle on um,
that's
how
smart.
how do our emotions connect with these different
Like
musical
mhm.
patterns. Um,
like with human feedback, like rewarding.
Possibly, yeah, that it's
Oh,
certainly a route that I'm considering at this point. Yeah.
Mhm. So
Mhm.
that's smart.
something that I thought about while we've been talking here is like obviously the computer wouldn't be able to put its own feelings and intent into the music, but do you think that that intent, I think, would come from you as the programmer and developer and the artists that you put into it? So if you think about it like that, it really could have intent because you have created it and it's creating music that you've made using it.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think there are some really fascinating questions about, where is that original intent and like drive to create something emotional? Where does that come from?
Hmm.
And probably it's from the programmer, or it's from the person who's using the piece.
Hmm.
It's funny you're raising that question, but it struck me a couple weeks ago of like what makes humans want to do that in the first place? Like
Right,
what
right.
drove us to, to have this sense that like this is something we should all do. Like we should, some people are driven. So yeah, I was like, what would ever make a computer have a sort of internal drive to do that, rather
Hmm.
than just we told it this is a good thing to do.
Right. So I guess now that we're kind of reaching the hour mark, um, I ask this to everyone who comes on. Who are, if you could have anyone come on the podcast and like just have them, just talk to and stuff. If you could have anyone come on, who would you like to see?
That's a good question. um, the person who's coming to mind is a clarinetist I played with ages ago back at Juilliard, Keenan, who's now he's been writing pieces everywhere. He's a clarinetist he's traveled the world,
Oh wow.
and part of it is his background is that he grew up in Syria, and so he's writing pieces related to that, and so he's just strikingly fantastic musician.
Hmm.
How do you spell that?
Kinan, and then I'm gonna maybe get this wrong, but I think it's Azmeh.
All right, yeah,
I could be
found
wrong
it, found
on that. Sorry.
Yeah, it's all good. So I think we're probably going to go ahead and wrap this up here then, if
it. Yeah,
because we're about an hour in. So yeah, I mean, thanks a million for coming on. It's been absolutely amazing, and it'll be really
fascinating.
cool to continue talking, or talk again at some point if there's interesting developments that come up with it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun to get to chat.
Yeah, so we'll put links in the description to anyone who's watching to check out the latest Musenet news and the link to the article that really wanted me to talk to Christine and get in touch with the people at Musenet. So we'll put that all down in the description. And
Oh,
thanks
and
a
there's
million.
something for the May 12th, right?
Huh?
Something happens May 12th.
Yes, we are right now hosting if you want to be able to try out Musenet, you should go to the webpage before May 12th.
All right.
Because that's where we're hosting the service.
All right. Yeah, I'm on the website right now.
Okay, great.
All right.
All right.
Yeah, it was fascinating. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
for your
thanks
time.
a million. So yeah, everyone go ahead and check out the latest stuff with Musenet. And thanks a million for coming on again. It means a lot. It was absolutely informative, super, super awesome talk.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Yeah,
Let's
of
do this
course.
again.
And also thank you to Ashley for helping set this all up and everything. So
Not a problem. Thanks for reaching out.
Of
This
course.
was great.
Yeah, so I think we'll go ahead and call it a wrap then.
All right.
Great. Thank you,
All right,
guys.
awesome. Thanks.
Have
Yeah,
a
you
beautiful
too.
day.
Have an awesome
Thank
day.
you.
Thanks for watching,
You
everybody.
too. Yeah, thanks
Bye.
as well.
Yep, see ya.
Bye.